The music's on, the disco ball has dropped, and it's time to get this party started. You're listening to episode 21 of DiscoTrek, a Star Trek Discovery After Party podcast here on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. I'm your host, Heather Barker, and with me, as always, is my favorite Jeff, my favorite Santa Gorn, my co-host, Jeff Hewlett. Hi, Jeff. How are you doing?
Hey, Heather. I'm doing pretty well. Got a little sick kitty over here in New Jersey, but he's resting comfortably, so my mind's at ease.
Everyone say a prayer for little Milo and his gassy tummy.
My poor boy. We were just talking about gas on the pre-show, so it's very appropriate.
No. Patreon people will know.
Yes.
You will find out if you're a Patreon member.
And if you're not a Patreon member, sign up so that you can hear about it.
Yes, we'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. First, we'd just like to reiterate for all of our new listeners that we are a community-based Star Trek discotheque of sorts, previously focusing on each episode of Star Trek Discovery, but now in the off-season, we are doing character deep dives. So tonight, we are talking about Lieutenant Paul Stamets. I'm making heart eyes right now. You can't see them. With us to talk about Lieutenant Paul Stamets is our great friend, Matt Hansen. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys. It's hotter than hell in Phoenix, but it's cool as ice here on the DiscoTrek floor, so I'm very glad to be back here.
We have the air conditioning cranked up so that everyone can party. Just be careful of the hole in the floor that will send you into Charon's giant burning mycelial sun thing. You don't want to do that.
No, Lorca just fell in there. Let's not let anybody else do it.
Nope. We're going to hop into our discussion about Paul Stamets here in a minute, but first we have some announcements from the DJs. That's Jeff and me. As we mentioned, DiscoTrek is community-focused and evolved from our desire to give fans in our convention community a way to talk about Star Trek Discovery. That group is the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook. We have moved to about once a month or bi-monthly episodes. So go join the group. Keep an eye out. You'll see a new post every now and then with the DiscoTrek image and information on the following week's character and recording time. Just comment on that post to be entered, and we'll use a random generator to pick 2 winners on Saturday to be on the podcast. Right now, if you've been on the podcast, you can come back as long as it's not consecutive weeks. When we go back to, I guess, season 2, whenever that comes out, hopefully January 2019 or before, then you can only be on the show once. Okay, there's still ways to be part of the discussion. A great way to do that is to, I don't know, Jeff, do you want to tell people how to do that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, you can always send us a tweet at disco_trek on Twitter if you want to get your comments read on the air. But we also have a voicemail box if you want to leave a voicemail for us on the show up to 2 minutes in length, and we will play that on the air. The phone number is 609-512-LLAP, and feel free to give that a call. No one will pick up. You don't have to worry about anybody answering the phone. It'll go straight to voicemail, and you can leave us a message that we can play here at the end of our show.
It would be really great if people would leave us a voicemail so we could play it, since we've gotten none.
Yeah, I think people really don't use the phone anymore. They just are few and far between.
It must be true. I know that personally I don't like the phone.
Yeah, me neither.
Well, and I can tell you, too, just from experience, when I first started podcasting, I was very self-conscious about the way I sounded on the air. Oh. So that could possibly be it, too.
Well,
that's true.
Well, I hope that someday someone calls in. In the meantime, just find us, tweet us, and we will do our best to get back to you and maybe shout out on the show. Mm-hmm. Speaking of shout outs, we don't have any Patreon shout outs because we saved them all for last week's shore leave. But We do have some Patreon news. Jeff, do you want to tell people about the next hangout we have scheduled?
Oh, absolutely. And before I do, I would just say, if you're not familiar with our Patreon page, you can find it at patreon.com/thetricordertransmissions, or you can visit our website, thetricordertransmissions.com, and click the orange Patreon link on the right-hand side to be taken to the page. So if you enjoy what we do here on DiscoTrek or any of our other Tricorder Transmission shows, please think about joining our list of patrons. And becoming a patron will give you several benefits right off the bat. One of which is instant access to unedited and early release episodes of just about all of our shows. Now, I think all of them are on there. So you'll get a barrage of early releases and unedited episodes that you can enjoy usually several days before the actual episode hits the airwaves with some bonus material. And we have a Patreon hangout that we've started to host on a monthly basis. The next one is scheduled for July 17th, and you can join up with that and get online with some of our hosts and talk Trek with us. And we record that and we release it to our regular audience, and we're going to be doing that monthly, so keep an eye out for that. And you will also have an exclusive pin that is only available to our Patreon patrons at any pledge level. So if you sign up even for $1 or whatever, you will get mailed a Patreon exclusive pin just for you.
What?
Yeah, and we got a lot of positive feedback on that pin too. People seem to really like it.
We do. People have been tweeting and posting pictures of the pin, and it's super fun to see that. And I just listened to the audio of the first Patreon hangout that we did, and I cried 3 times.
It was super fun.
It sounded super fun, and what everyone had to say about our network and positivity, it played my heartstrings. So I'm not lying. I seriously cried 3 times.
We have such sweet Patreon patrons. It's amazing that so many people support the show and the network, and we love all of you guys.
We do. We feel the love. We send the love.
We do.
Speaking of love, I love Paul Stamets.
Nice segue.
We are going to talk all about Paul Stamets. So I hope you've seen all of season 1 of Discovery. If you haven't, please go back and watch it and then come and listen, because there will be spoilers. Generally, just so everyone knows, we do have a format to the show. It's formatted into 3 sections. Drop the record, play a new track, spin it again. But for character deep dives, we're just jumping in. We're just going to drop the record and let it play. So this will be a general organic discussion about the character, and we hope you guys enjoy it. So, all right, Paul Stamets. We did not meet Paul Stamets until we were on the Discovery in episode 3, and I don't know. Okay, I say this and then I'm like, no. He's probably my favorite character. It's really difficult for me to pick a favorite character in Discovery because they all resonate with me on some level. Like if you listen to our last episode about Saru, you probably thought Saru was my favorite character. And maybe he was when we did that podcast. But Paul Stamets owns a special place in my heart, not just because he's a really amazing, wonderful character, but Anthony Rapp is an amazing, wonderful human being. So I'm curious, when we first met Stamets, he was a bit persnickety, as Tilly would say, a little standoffish, and we got to know him a lot better over the season. So, Matt, what was your first impression of Stamets, and did it change throughout the first season of Discovery?
Maybe I'm just attracted to like a-holes, but like I know that I know that people felt the same way about like Kira when she was first introduced on DS9, that she was very abrasive, that she was generally unpleasant. But just like Kira, Stamets is someone that I gravitated to right away. Like I said, I don't know if I just like mean people. Maybe I do in some sense. But I could, when someone is like that right away, you know that if they wrote the character right, then there's just more of a backstory there that you're going to get to know. And I think I instinctually detected that with Kira, and I felt the same way here about Stamets. So I actually liked him from, I almost said episode 1, but it's technically episode 3. So I liked him since episode 3.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I was not off put by how he acted in the first episode. Well, I guess I guess he was still kind of that way in a couple episodes when we first met him. But yeah, to me, I was just like, there's definitely more going on here. And you know, as we find out, you know, he's a scientist, and basically his research has been taken by Starfleet to, you know, be turned into not quite a weapon, but you know, put into a war basically on the ship. So I understood why he would be upset about that. So I assume then by the end of the season, Matt, you maybe were in love with him even more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, this character means a lot to me as someone who is a member of the LGBT community. This is the first regular representation on Star Trek. There have been, allegories, and then of course you had Sulu in Star Trek Beyond, which was great. But this was the first time you had a regular character who that was part of who they were. And what I had hoped would happen did end up happening, which is, the fact that Stamets is gay is just one facet of his character, and you see that played out as it would be like in real life. It's just merely one thing that makes him who he is. But you also see him being the scientist. You see him being the bitchy coworker. You see him, kind of being goofy in a couple of places, and he's a really layered character who happens to be gay, and that's exactly what I hoped for and what I got. So
yeah, it always kind of, I don't know. It's just, you hear it all the time. Oh, well, they're just going to make this a token gay character, and oh, it's going to be so gay. Like, and they say that, in an offensive way. It's like, no, we don't parade our LGBT community around in the pride flag through the whole Discovery show, like making a point that this is what this character is. And I think that, it seems like the majority of the community was really happy with how Stamets and Culber were portrayed. We'll talk about the Culber part in a little while, because I do think that's an important thing. Even though we're not specifically talking about Culber, they did have a relationship, and that was a very difficult thing to handle. Sorry, it's hard for me to talk about that, but like for me, one of the standout moments was just the two of them in their pajamas brushing their teeth, and that was the first. Was that even like just the first kind of behind the scenes casual scene that we saw of anyone?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was, right?
Of anyone or just that?
No, them, yeah.
Yeah, them, yes, because the only things up to that point were like seeing a couple scenes in sickbay and maybe one scene on the bridge.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, what about you? How did you feel about Stamets when we met him, and did your opinion change over the course of the season?
Well, I think my comments are going to sound an awful lot like both of yours, but my first impressions, and I have made that point on DiscoTrek before, that I felt that he was very coarse and almost off-putting when we first met him. Kind of similar to the way I approached Saru from the last DiscoTrek episode. I wasn't really a huge fan of his at the beginning, but I really grew to love him over the course of the season. I think it's just the way his character played out, and I felt like the more insight we got into his story, the more and more relatable he became. Of course, you mentioned already that, he's the scientist whose work is co-opted for military use, and he's not okay with that. I think that shed some light on why he had that chip on his shoulder. I kind of felt like I understood where he was coming from and why he came off so coarse early on, because he was just kind of struggling with the fact that his life's work was being used in a way that he didn't necessarily agree with. And I mean, of course, there are so many other things that, his relationship with Culber that we've already talked about a little bit, and we'll talk more about later. And, the relationships that he builds with fellow crew members like Tilly over the course of the show, I think it added much more of a personal side that we didn't get to see in the earlier episodes. And so overall, I think, Stamets started off in kind of a similar place for me as Saru did. And by the end of the season, he was one of my favorite characters in the whole arc.
Yay. Sorry, just makes me happy. Yeah, and I think for me, like the relationships with the characters were just a huge part of his character development. Uh, and I feel like, one of the things we struggle with Discovery is that we don't get one episode that's focused on a character and get that development out of, 45 minutes. For me, the character relationship standouts were with Michael Burnham, Tilly, and then Lorca. Well, aside from Culber, of course, but especially the dance for science moment with Michael and Magic to make the same man go mad.
I was gonna say once we got to moments, that was gonna be one of my standout moments for sure.
Yeah, and I think it is for a lot of people because it was beautiful and powerful, and we see. That's just such a fun episode. I love that episode to begin with. But we see these different facets of Stamets' personality, like where he's goofy and loopy at first, and then we start to see him again, and he's like, he's warning them that something's going on and trying to break through to her. Yeah, the dance for science moment sticks out to me for sure, and especially when they hold hands, like not just the dancing part, but when they hold hands and basically are waiting to die. That was just such a really, really cool scene for me.
Plus, it shows off he has a sense of humor too, a dry sense of humor that I really like, because like isn't he the one that at some point in that episode sees Burnham interacting with Tyler and then not doing well, and he says, "You really don't know how to do this, do you?"
Yep.
Or something to that effect.
Yep. And he really, he's a friend and he's a mentor. Like to Burnham in that episode, and with Tilly. And sorry, I'm just like focusing on moments right now, but that's what happens with this character. He had so many great ones. When they're sciencing, and then this is so bleep bleep cool moment. They're all sciencing together, the three of them. And
I was gonna say the moment when a million Trek fans clutch their pearls like they never heard the F word before in their life.
Oh my gosh!
I know, such a big deal.
Never mind the fact that Data said as the Enterprise was crashing.
Yeah. True.
There have been words, and even in TOS, like saying hell was a very bad word to say at that time. So Trek has been setting this precedent, and at the end of the day, we got the F word once in 15 episodes, and I think we got the S word twice.
And I think they were all in the movies. Like the S words were both in the movies.
Yeah, and it's not like they went like full South Park with it and did an episode where they said, the F word or the S word rather for South Park as many times as they possibly could on the episode just for shock value.
And let's be perfectly honest with ourselves. We're getting off topic here, but let's be honest with ourselves. Like, I don't care how evolved we get in 200 years, those words aren't going away.
No.
I highly doubt it. Yeah. And I don't mind getting off topic because I don't. It's even not because like the fact that she said it and then Stamets reinforced it, and so like when she said it, I was like, oh my gosh, and then when he said it back, I was just like, yeah. Oh, that was loud. Sorry. It was just such a cool moment, and for him to come back and reinforce it, and that Stamets sees in Tilly that she's good at what she does. She's smart. She's interested in science. She knows how to science. She has high goals, which he may not know she wants to be a captain yet. But he definitely sees that in her and wants to encourage and nurture it. And
I think he recognizes someone in her that, as she's a person who's not jaded yet by the system, that it's someone that he can instill his love of science and the want to be an explorer into it, because we see that that's a big issue between him and Lorca is Lorca's corrupting or co-opting rather his work for military purposes, and that's not what he ever intended it for. So here's this person who is just starting out in their Starfleet career. She's wide-eyed. She wants to learn, and here's his chance to shield her and have her avoid some of the stuff that he had to go through to get where he is and not become a cynic.
Yeah. And then the tables turn, and when there's something wrong with him and she realizes it, she sits down with him and is like, what's going on? And how, what can we do to help you? So I really admired that relationship because.
Can I make one more point really quickly about the F-bombs, by the way? I don't know if I don't think we talked about this on the DiscoTrek when it actually happened, but I think it's kind of important to note too that the use of the F word in Discovery was not used in a hostile or negative or derogatory way. They weren't saying like F somebody. It was being used in excitement and also in a positive way. So it wasn't just thrown in there as a shock value word. It was used to emphasize how excited the two of them were about what was happening in the episode. And I think it's important to remember that. It seemed like the outrage to me over the use of that word was a little bit overblown because they were using it to express excitement. And a lot of us do that in our everyday lives, and it really was effing cool what they were doing.
They just had their minds blown. Yeah. So, when you're that excited, you don't censor yourself. Right. So, I mean, to me, stuff like that makes it feel more real world. Mm-hmm. And I know Star Trek always has this like air of, part of the real appeal is that it's a future world that's different from ours, but at the same time, in the Star Trek lore, this is closer to where we are than it was to like toward the end of Voyager and Next Generation. So it helps me, at least as an audience member, to see that's where we could end up in 200 years, as opposed to like the perfect utopia. That's what I liked about Discovery, and specifically about Stamets, and why I gravitated toward minute one, is that I like my Star Trek characters flawed, and there's nothing if not a bunch of flawed characters that make up Discovery, and that's probably why it rivals. It's for me, it's neck and neck with DS9 as my favorite incarnation of Trek on TV.
Yep. Yeah, I think they're very similar for having flawed characters and for being, everyone says darker. Oh, DS9 was so dark. This is so dark. And yet, DS9 has been my favorite Trek up until Discovery. And to be fair, while Star Trek Discovery is what I'm calling is my Trek, like it means so much to me. I identify with almost all of these characters, and it has been there through an extremely dark period in my life. Given that we've only gotten one season right now, like I still think that DS9 is the best Trek.
That's why I hesitate. That's why I hesitate to call it my favorite, because that's why I say it's neck and neck. But it's up there. Like in just one season, it made that much of an impact on me. Yeah. And not that I don't like the other series that are more optimistic or more lighthearted or anything like that, but what I like about the flawed characters in both DS9 and here in Discovery is that when I look at someone like, a character I really love and admire, like Jean-Luc Picard, like I can look up to him, but I don't ever feel, and I don't mean this as a negative, I don't feel like I could ever like live up to him. He's such an idealized father figure standard that I could never be that pure of heart or that good. And when I look at the characters in DS9 and Discovery, as flawed as they are, and as some, some of them make poor choices, I can still see myself in that and realize that that's life. And still, I think the message for me is more hopeful in that, even with your flaws, you can still become a better person. It's just harder work.
And really, like, isn't that so much who Stamets is? Because, we meet him and he's difficult for some people to handle at first. And with reason. Like, I just can't emphasize that enough as we learn, because not only was his research kind of taken from him in a way, but then, his partner his research partner dies on the Glen. Like I think the same episode.
The first episode. The first episode with him in it. Yeah.
So, now that's just even more insult to injury. And then, we see him risk his life over and over and over again, being one with the spore drive, as I'll call it. And then even, at the very end, when they survive this, we have to do all of the jumps, which he somehow made it through all of that. And then there's the moment with Lorca preying on Stamets and manipulating his love of science. And like I think I may have mentioned it previously, how, even in those scenes, like Lorca manipulated me too, because I believed what he was saying. And then no, that wasn't it at all. He really is a beacon of positivity and good stuff by the end of season 1. And that's even despite having his husband, or we assume they're married, right? We don't know.
We don't know, but like I think it's not an unreasonable presumption.
It doesn't matter. His partner, it's just having his partner murdered. And I'm still curious to see in season 2 if Stamets deals with those emotions any further.
I'm sure it'll have to, because I mean, season 2, I'm guessing, since we have, the Enterprise coming in, it's going to pick up where season 1 left off. And he was starting, when they got back from the mirror universe, he had sort of, gotten to say that quasi goodbye to him in the mycelial network. But he had that great moment that little moment with him and Tyler, where like there wasn't hatred, but there wasn't complete forgiveness either.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to see where those two characters, if they ever meet up again, what that relationship is going to be like. Because I mean, no matter what kind of Deus Ex Machina that was going on with Tyler, it was still his body that snapped Culber's neck. So I mean, I don't see how you move past something like that so quickly.
And even if that is the majority of what we got, it still shows you that, like you said, it wasn't complete hatred. It was, certainly there is anger there.
Right. It wasn't complete hatred, but it wasn't like, oh, we're cool now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But, just the fact that he didn't just immediately try to go after Ash and kill Ash. He's not consumed by that. That's just not who he is. Matt, do we want to talk more about the relationship with Culber?
I mean, yeah, we can for sure. And like, it's like I said, what you mentioned earlier, it's just like that nice scene of them being a domestic couple where, it's not a bedroom scene. It's not like some make-out scene. Although, like, I wouldn't have had problems with either of those. Okay. Because Lord knows we've seen enough make-out between like Kirk and the random woman since the 60s. But the fact that it was just them doing an everyday thing that you do either to get ready for bed or get ready for work, it does a lot to a mainstream audience, I would say, to kind of like demonstrate that this is no different than any other relationship that you're familiar with. And, see, it's not this scary thing where, there's a bunch of glitter and all this stuff, Not that there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying,
it's true.
There's more to us than just the party life.
Yes, right. Yes. It's sad that we're still fighting that assumption of what gay life is, but it's one thing for people out there to have friends that are LGBT. It's another thing to have a relationship with them. To the point that, you see those things. And sadly, I think there is so much of the United States anyway, just isn't exposed to that.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. No, I was going to say the same thing. A lot of people, not to defend that mindset, but I think that a lot of people, they haven't had a chance to experience what an LGBT relationship is actually like in real life. They only see, sensationalized versions of it. And I respected Discovery a lot for portraying it in the way that they did, and maybe giving people who haven't had a chance to experience that or witness that to see what it's really like, what life is like, and showing it in the same way that any relationship would be.
And that's what irked me so much about like some of the complaining about there being a gay character or couple on Star Trek. It's just like, why is that coming into Star Trek? And I'm like, why isn't it coming into Star Trek? Because Star Trek is the perfect platform for this. It's been doing these sorts of things and bringing up these topics for 52 years now. So, I mean, this is, if you're going to do it on any show, this is the show to do it. I mean, because we did it back in the 60s with African American and race relations, up through the 90s when we had an African American lead and a female lead, and this is the next step. So this has been part and parcel of this series' DNA for 52 years. So
yeah, and Matt, you mentioned that Star Trek has a history of trying to push the envelope with the queer community a bit. A lot of people talk about, DS9's Rejoined, which had Dax and then Lenara Khan, who were obviously still in love with each other, and they had the lesbian kiss. And, that episode gets explained away by the fact that, the previous hosts that the symbionts were in were a heterosexual couple.
Right.
So it's like they push it just so far, and then they can't go all the way.
Well, and the way I always looked at it is, when you have something like that, or you have what makes a lot of people kind of cock their heads slightly is the end of the episode, the host, where Beverly doesn't continue the relationship with O'Donnell, now that she's a woman.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, from the way I look at it is like, we're getting closer. Like, for the time, that was still pretty groundbreaking, because I mean, by the time that the episode with Lenara was airing, Ellen DeGeneres was getting canceled for coming out. So, it's something that was pushing the envelope. And two, just because things aren't as progressive as you would like them to be doesn't mean that they're falsely portrayed. I never had a problem with the end of the host, because Beverly at the end of the day is a heterosexual female. So I mean, to have her be fluid like that all of a sudden, that's not who she is, and that's not who I would be in that situation.
Yeah.
It's so if my perspective is, if the homosexual community is trying to portray themselves as real, and these are our actual facets, we have to respect the same thing for those of the heterosexual community. So I know, again, not talking about Discovery, but that's why something like the end of the host never bothered me.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ellen and the fact that Ellen was basically canceled for coming out, and I just always like to point out that where Star Trek has tried to push boundaries, it's networks hold them back a lot of times, and that's not all the time, but it is part of it. And again, I'm going off on a segment here, and it's just because we're talking about LGBT characters and issues. It's just important for me to say that, because I've had these discussions about the episodes that just kind of push it so far and then explain it away somehow. And while I certainly understand the disappointment there, it's also important to realize that for especially young people that watched a show like Rejoined when it aired, that was their first exposure to a kiss between two women being a completely normal and beautiful thing. And I know people personally who that episode helped them better understand their own sexuality and feel that was acceptable to be that way. Right. So even if those episodes aren't necessarily what we want them to be, especially, as LGBT people, they may not live up to our standards. I think they were still incredibly valuable to have. And it's wonderful that we do now live in a time when we can have Stamets and Culber have a completely normal relationship. And I would not have expected anything but a completely normal relationship from Star Trek.
And that's the other thing too, is that when the other characters, they interact with them, not a single person comments on it.
Yeah. Yep. And that is true. Sorry, Jeff, I don't mean to keep talking over you and interrupting you. It's something that's true to Star Trek. I was just watching DS9 episode that has Pell in it, who is
Rules of Acquisition.
Yeah, thank you. And so when Pell is talking to Dax, and up until this point, Dax thinks that Pell is a male or a man, and she's like, "Oh, well, you're in love with Quark." And it's a totally normal thing. Dax doesn't blink an eye because, you know, having one man in love with another man is something that's completely normal. And that is a small moment, but it's just such a meaningful moment that there's nothing abnormal or strange or wrong with same-sex relationships
Right.
or love. And you know, so Star Trek has set that precedent, and now they've gotten the opportunity to really drive it home. And for me, like Stamets and Culber, I think are my favorite couple in all of Star Trek. I just love how loving and healthy their relationship is. The way that it's portrayed, like they do kind of not squabble, but like
It feels real though, like, you know,
yeah,
no disrespect to any of the other romances in Star Trek, because we've all had our ups and downs and we've liked different pairings, but like this was the, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was kind of felt like to me like the first couple where we didn't have to play this, you know, will they, won't they? Oh, like it didn't feel Hollywood. It
hmm
felt like just another married couple at home. And that's the
yeah,
first, like, I don't know if I ever felt that way about any of the other couples, because, you know, with the other couples, it took seasons and seasons of them interacting before they realized they even had feelings for each other. And then it's very, you know, not to belittle it, but it's played as like very soap opera-y. This
hmm
one, there was, you know, I think rightly so, not glitzy and glamour and isn't this so romantic and stuff like that. It was just a married couple, and
yeah.
that felt incredibly real to me.
Yeah, it and just in a healthy relationship. Like that's the other thing, and that's something that we don't always see in Star Trek. Like I think that Jadzia and Worf had a pretty strong, good relationship, but it's just not common in Star Trek to have these relationships, man. And I don't know, like I know that Anthony Rapp has a great boyfriend and they're an adorable couple. But I was just like, oh my gosh, like Wilson and Anthony are just so perfect together. They it really speaks of their talent as actors that they can make a relationship be so believable that like I would love to see them together in person. And it was great to see them on After Trek, just, you know, representing Trek, talking about I'm in love with Wilson too. I think that both of these men are just extraordinary, beautiful people. And I really admire their on-screen relationship and their off-screen relationship.
Well, geez, I mean, if you want us to talk about the actual humans that play these characters, we could do a whole other show just on
Yes,
Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz.
yes.
I mean, not only do they have great chemistry together, but, you know, just speaking as a fan perspective, they're so enthusiastic and so warm-hearted and welcoming, and like really, like, you could tell from both the interviews and the finished product, they really put all their hard work and effort into this, and they did it because they wanted to do a good job for themselves, but do a good job for us. And
Yeah,
that's something that feels incredibly rewarding.
yeah, it truly is.
I'm just going to throw this out there because it wasn't mentioned as a part of the Stamets and Cobra relationship. But I thought one of the most poignant moments for me in their relationship was when they were planning to redo their first date and seeing La Boheme again. I thought that was really touching and humanizing and real. Just throwing that out there.
The Rent reference was nice. I wasn't done with the subject. I was going to talk about the very bad thing that happens, but I will say that so ever since the bathroom scene, I was waiting for that kiss. That kiss in Into the Forest I Go. I think I cried, and I tweeted about it and how proud I was to be a Star Trek fan that night.
Right.
And I was extremely thrilled. This is not a brag. That tweet got retweeted, I don't know, 500 or 600 times. And with all of that attention, I got maybe a handful of homophobic comments. So, in this time of toxic fandom, and there have been a lot of podcasts recently about the subject, especially and we ourselves did an episode on the harassment that Anthony and Wilson and others received throughout the season of Discovery. I just think it's important to realize that despite the fact that, yes, I did get some pretty awful comments in response to that, the fact that it was retweeted and liked and got good responses is far more powerful than any of the homophobic stuff that I saw.
I agree. I did the same thing when with the scene with the brushing their teeth. I tweeted something out and got a lot of support with it. So
yeah, it's been tough. Earlier, and when we started DiscoTrek and Anthony and Wilson were getting a lot of hate, I dubbed this the Shroom Army because people love Anthony and Wilson. People love Discovery, and well, I was going to say Star Trek fans don't like hate, but there are Star Trek fans that are very hateful out there. But it's been amazing to watch our community rally up to protect them, or at least try to. And I say over and over again, like, how much I'm hoping that Anthony makes it to STLV so that we can thank them personally.
I know. If they make it to STLV this year, I'm going to kill myself because I can't go.
No, I'll FaceTime you when I'm there, and then you'll be there in a way. But okay, so let's dive into this, because I don't remember if we've talked about this, Matt. Jeff and I have talked about the death of Culber. We've kind of beaten it into the ground, but how did you feel about it? Were you did it fall into the kill your gays trope for you? I just think it's important for you to talk about this too.
No, although I will say, this is how trained I am in online response and Star Trek fandom and just trying to combat negativity, is that when it happened, of course it shocked me and of course I was sad, but I didn't think it was a kill your gays kind of moment, but at the same time, B, I was like, oh God, what is the fan community going to say now about this? I could just hear the furious typing as it happens. But I knew that they wouldn't do something like that. Anthony and Wilson had been so public about how proud they were of the work that they were doing, and the fact that Star Trek was getting this representation that it hadn't had before. That you could just tell that those two people in real life have a degree of integrity about their work. So I knew that by killing off Cobra in that moment, Wilson and Anthony would not be going around saying these things, these positive things, if they had fundamental disagreements about how their characters are being handled. Because neither of them strike me as people that would say nice things for money. You know what I mean? They strike me as people who would walk away from the series.
Yeah. And especially Wilson. I don't know. And not to detract from Anthony or at all. I mean, I get and that's where I really struggled, because, we were right in the middle of it, and it did feel a lot like it fell into that trope for me. And I was upset about it. And honestly, I was more upset that moment was shoved in our face repeatedly with these recaps, because that was just a very difficult thing to see. Culber, we didn't get to know Culber very well, but what we got to see of Culber, I just fell in love with him. I thought he was just such a sensitive person, and I wanted to see a lot more. And so when it happened, I was really upset. And over time, I've kind of come back around to where you're at, Matt, where it's I trust them. Let me put it that way. I trust them. Wilson will be back. I don't know that he's going to be back from the dead, on the show. I mean,
that's the other thing too, is that when I saw it, I was like, this is Star Trek. Death is a temporary career setback.
And it's at this point, I'm just curious to see what happens. And part of that also is I'm really tired of being angry right now. There's a lot in the world and our current events to be angry about. And right. I'm much more angry at things like toxic fandom than I am at this having happened. I still think, I think that anyone's feelings towards it, whether they think it's a trope or not, are valid. And I see all sides and I agree with these sides, but I'm just done being angry. And
Especially since I also didn't want to get angry at it either, because it's like, well, this is the first episode of, like, we still got a half season to go. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and have them finish whatever story it is they're trying to tell. And then we can debate about how well or that death was served or not. And now that we've gotten a chance to see how that played out and that final scene between them, at least this season in the Mycelial Network, I felt that paid off, but you had to be patient.
Yeah. I want to see more. Like,
of course I want to see more.
I think it's going to take like season 2 to really convince me. Oh man, it was just so hard. It's just so, I was like, why? And I know it's for the story. Like, I know, I'm just like, why? Why did it have to be him? Like, I love them so much, and I just want to see them happy and whole, and they're the last people that I wanted to see one of them die.
Well, I'm trying to think, because usually Star Trek, it's not that Star Trek doesn't do death well, but if you think about all the deaths of major characters that have happened in Star Trek up to this point, they've all been kind of telegraphed in one way or another. And I feel like Culber's death was the first one that came completely out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Even Tasha Yar's first death was kind of telegraphed to a point, because she's got that scene at the beginning between her and Worf where she's kind of getting, like, you know, touchy-feely and that sort of thing. And usually people like that get that before they die. It's just a thing in fiction. But this one, I think the reason we all reacted so strongly to it is because it happened in the middle of the scene when that was not the expected way to go. Like, yeah. I mean, the three of us have seen hours and hours and hours of Star Trek. That's never happened unless it's like a scene between Klingons. You know, it's that just doesn't happen.
No, it was extremely shocking, and like I said, I think that was why it was even harder to see it happen over and over and over again. Which why they did that, I don't know. That was frustrating to me, and it would have been regardless of the character. Like, these are all beloved characters to me. Even if it had been Lorca, I think it would have bothered me, even though I like Lorca way less now than I did when we thought he was prime Lorca. But yeah, like I said, I'm leaving it as I trust them. I trust Wilson. I trust Anthony. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
I think we said so much about this on past DiscoTrek, so I just don't want to retread a bunch of old material. But yeah, I was a little bit frustrated by how often it was thrown back in our faces after it happened. I think it was shocking enough when it happened. They didn't need to keep showing it in the previously on segment, like, for the next few episodes.
Yeah.
So Matt's right, and it was a different type of a character death in Star Trek than we'd seen before, and I guess that is a good point of discussion. But I think the aftermath of it, just being kind of retread just kind of became, I don't want to say hurtful, but it was almost hurtful for people like us who were so affected by it.
So we're kind of running out of time, which it doesn't surprise me. There's so much to say about Paul Stamets that maybe we need like part 2 of Paul Stamets. Seriously. We talked a little bit about him with Michael Burnham. I mean, I guess we sort of touched on those things.
Yeah, we did.
I think, ultimately, I think that he is one of the most developed characters of season 1. Would you guys agree?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the words to sum it up. I don't know how. He's just so amazing.
I'll say something. 2 quick things in there before we wrap. So 2 things that we didn't mention about him that I found really defining and interesting was one was the fact that he manipulated his own DNA against the code of Starfleet, which I think showed a real strength of character, that he was willing to break the law, so to speak, in order to find a way to make the spore drive work and become
the hero. Not kill an animal.
Yeah, and to protect the life of animals and prove that they didn't have to be cruel to the tardigrades to make the spore drive work. And I think it also bears mentioning that we haven't mentioned Mirror Stamets at all, but I thought that it was really interesting that Stamets and Mirror Stamets were the only two characters across two universes who were actually really similar. Everyone else was pretty much the mirror opposite, which you would expect, right? But Mirror Stamets was not that far removed from Prime Stamets. So,
which in a way I think is it's actually more interesting, because as fun as it is to run into the opposite of yourself, what I like about that, what that says about the mirror universe to me is like, just change a few circumstances or make some different choices, and you could have ended up as your bad mirror self, quote unquote. You know.
But does that mean that Paul Stamets rode the neutral line so closely that his mirror character was almost the same?
If we get into subjects of mirror universes and parallel universes, I'm going to just ruin everything talking about the science. And I feel like that's a whole other rabbit hole.
We'll probably wind up doing a DiscoTrek on that.
Yeah, we'll save that for later.
Well, I was just going to say, to give you a chance to try to find your thoughts, for wrapping up, my final thoughts on the matter is just, with Paul Stamets, the way I'll put it is this way, is with the character of Paul Stamets, I, at 29 years old, had my Whoopi Goldberg moment. And what I mean by that is that Whoopi Goldberg, if you've ever seen her talk about Star Trek or her character, she always talks about how Star Trek made an impact on her because it was the first show that she saw with Nichelle Nichols and Lieutenant Uhura, an African-American woman in a position of power, and that gave her this kind of beacon of hope and this symbol that they had, their legacy had continued on into the future. And, she saw that when she was young, and here I am seeing this when I'm 29. So it's I don't have the same childlike wonder that I'm sure she did, but it's nice to finally understand what that moment is like. And that's really one of the best things that Paul Stamets as a character and as a concept, and what Anthony Rapp did with him, meant to me. So I got my Whoopi Goldberg moment. It only took 29 years, but I got it.
I think it's so important to remember that representation matters, and that regardless of whether you feel any tropes happened in Star Trek, for some individuals it was that moment. And I think for a lot of people, even something that we don't realize we need, I guess it's hard to say that. It was like when having Sulu be gay and beyond, it was, I appreciated it a lot. And when I saw that moment of, Kirk watching Sulu meet his husband and daughter, like, I cried. It was a weird,
it was
like,
great.
It was like, it's hard for me to explain. It's just like, it's something that you really needed to see, like, and there's like a relief there, like that you finally see people like you. And I mean, I'm pansexual, bisexual, define it how you want. And I've only probably in the last, I've been this way for my entire life. I didn't understand it or accept it, that it was an okay thing to be for a very long time, and really for about probably the last 10 years or so, have really come to understand who I am, and be involved in the community. But even for me, it's just so important to see, and so monumental for Discovery to have this beautiful couple, to have this strong, amazing character. I just hope that more and more people are exposed to characters like this. Characters that, like you said, Matt, that aren't, how do we say, it just comes back to the fact that a lot of people think that, gay culture is a pride parade every day. Right. And that's absolutely untrue. And having characters like this, regardless of I don't want to say regardless of what happens. It's still difficult for me to say. It's just important. It's just important.
It is. It is because you're not showing these things as not being extremes or otherworldly. You're in a way, and I don't mean to use this word derisively, but you're in a way normalizing them for people who may not understand it. And again, I don't want to call it normal because it just it makes me think of Generations with Soren. Normal is what everyone else is, and you are not. But you know what I mean. It makes these things by showing it as they are and not as what society or comedic effect would have you believe. Yeah. It makes it much less alien to someone else who wouldn't necessarily understand.
And I mean, that's what Star Trek does. And, we've finally made it, and we have a way to go still, but it's so super important. And before we go, I know that Anthony listens sometimes. I don't know if he listens to all of these. I will tag him.
Well, I mean, he's tweeted us at several points, several times, and that just, if you want to make my day, have him tweet to me.
I'm sure it makes all of our days. So, I don't know if he's still listening, but I was really excited to do this episode because in a way, it's our way of telling him what, how much we admire Stamets and admire Anthony as a person. So I really, if you're not following Anthony on Twitter, go follow him on Twitter.
First of all, if you're not following him on Twitter, what's wrong with your life? And I, just in case he is listening, I would just want to say, Anthony, we love you and thank you so much for what you've done with us for this character. Speaking for myself, I can't wait to go on more of the journey with him with season 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot agree more. We are blessed. We are blessed to have all of these actors on Discovery, and sometimes I don't think that people.
Oh, we got lucky.
We did. It's such an amazing cast, and if you've followed Anthony's career, I mean, he's an amazing actor, and so I'm always happy when other people know who he is and know his history, and appreciate it even more. But it's just you have an incredible actor, an incredible human being. Who uses his voice. And that's one thing I just have to say is I am just so proud and appreciative of Anthony and Wilson for just, being advocates in the community. And I'm going to cry, so that's not good. Big advocates in the community for the community and using your voice to speak out against hate and against bullying. That's a hard thing to do. We do it here at Tricorder. It can be scary, and you deal with a lot of stuff you should never have to. And Shroom Army will be here to keep fighting with them. But yeah, go follow him. Join our Shroom Army. Jeff, do you have any closing thoughts on how awesome Stamets and Anthony Rapp are? Because that's basically what this podcast has been.
Well, I think you guys have really captured that well with what you said, but I want to make a quick closing comment about how awesome Matt is. And I want to say, hearing you talk about having your Whoopi Goldberg moment, as somebody who in 43 years of my life have never felt like I ever fit in anywhere, I feel much more grateful now after hearing you say that I was so fortunate to have my Star Trek Whoopi Goldberg moment back in the 70s when, Spock appeared to me and made me realize that, being different was okay and you could still be respected and be, loved, even though you were so weird and odd and different and alien, to people around you. And I'm just really grateful to know that you've had that moment with Star Trek now, and it's such a well-deserved moment, and I'm so glad that you had it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aw, feeling all the feels.
Yeah.
That's
so I'll let it go there. I'm not going to get too emotional myself. All
right.
Before this turns into a weep fest, let's wrap this up.
We don't need to have one of those. Okay, so if people want to continue singing praises of Paul Stamets and Anthony Rapp. How can they find you on social media, Matt?
So you can find me at mhansen 0207 HANSEN. You can also find me every Thursday on the Trekmate Network doing Upper Pylon to the Deep Space Nine Review podcast. We're in season 7, so the show is quickly coming to a close.
Oh no! Then what will you do?
Well, other than like doing guest appearances and stuff on other networks, as far as regular podcasting goes, I think I'm going to retire at least for a little bit.
Oh, I will be sad. I love listening to you over Nerd Party.
I mean, I will still be on Nerd Party and I will still make guest appearances, but like, a week in, week out show, by the time Upper Pylon wraps up, it'll be the end of law school and I'll be starting my career. So It's time. But it's been a good run, and like I said, I'm not going away. Like I'm not putting myself out to pasture. I'm just I'm stepping down from doing this every week. That's all.
I hear you. Well, I'm sure we'll have you back on Tricorder Transmissions somehow, some way, someday.
Oh,
so we look forward to that. Jeff, where can we find you?
Well, in the same old familiar places. I'm at Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter, and you can find me in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group, which is becoming increasingly easier to say on podcasts than it has been in the past, along with yourself, Heather, and our wonderful friend Jesse Akendo, who unfortunately could not be with us tonight.
Yep, sorry we missed you, Jesse. That's why we only had the 3 of us. But you can find me on Twitter at LLAPosper, which is LLAPAWSPER. The show is Disco_Trek. Our network is at Tricorder Show. Be sure to follow us in both places. I will be doing a poll starting tomorrow to choose our next character deep dive. So I will pull some names out of the hat and give you guys a week to decide who we're going to talk about. And then if you follow us at Tricorder Show, you will be notified when all of our shows drop. We have a lot more than DiscoTrek and a lot more than Shore Leave. So we want to make sure everyone knows about all of our shows. That's a great way to do it. You can also find us at the Tricorder Transmissions on Facebook and the tricordertransmissions.com for every podcast that we have and guest appearances and everything else.
And knock on wood, given some of these rumors about new Star Trek developments, you guys will have a lot more shows.
Oh no.
That's the thing, right? Is like I'm getting ready to retire from regular podcasting, and I'm retiring just as Star Trek is like flaring up again. My entire podcasting career was during the off years, and now that it's starting up again, I'm going to retire. Go figure.
Well, with that being said, if anyone out there will be, is interested in producing a show and bringing it to us wrapped in a tight little bow, we are always looking to add new shows to the network. Jeff and I will see what happens in the downtime between DiscoTrek seasons. If they do this thing where they have Discovery and then they do a mini series or stuff like that, Jeff and I may be able to handle that, but I don't think Jeff and I can handle what would essentially be a third show.
Probably not.
A fourth show, a fifth show.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
it's pretty awesome to be a Trek fan right now.
It absolutely is.
We got possible multiple shows. We've got a fourth JJ verse movie coming up. We're in a good place.
Yeah,
we're in a place I never thought we'd be back in this comfort zone of the 90s, but we're slowly getting there.
We're getting there. I am not afraid of franchise fatigue. Bring it on. And all the Discovery haters out there can eat their words now. Like, sorry, I hate to be like that, but obviously Discovery has done extremely well. This would not be happening if Discovery had bombed. So I think that that's important. Obviously, we love Discovery here, and we want to promote and support it. There were a lot of people who thought this show would fail, and I'm very, very proud that it did not.
Yeah, Star Trek beats the odds once again.
It does.
Yes, it does. Be torchbearers, people, not gatekeepers. We will see you soon at STLV. Come find Jeff and I. We have something special for you to add to your collection of pins. So hunt us down.
And not to mention, having met both of these guys in person over several years, just hunt them down anyway. They're great people to have.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Well, we will see you guys next time. Until then, live long and prosper, and long live the Empire.